In here I have a species I get asked about a lot, and that are the snail eaters or Malayemys subtriinga. And I get asked about these turtles a lot because they have the reputation to be quite fragile. And I figured in this video I want to get deeper into how I take care of my 3 individuals. In my search online for info about the care of the species, I could not find a lot. Most of the documentation was about the fragile nature of the species, which were often experiences with wild-caught animals, and most of the posts that I saw on forums were actually quite bad experiences and people who had issues with the species and them certainly dying. When I look for videos, most of them are actually of this species being found in parks in Thailand and in temples in Thailand and other areas. So when I approach the care of this animal, of course I have listened to the breeder, I have looked at their natural habitat, and I actually also have a different species that is found in the same region and type of habitat, and that is the Seperate crassicollis. Now of course, Seperate and Malayemys are 2 totally different species, but at least when it came to the approach of the setup, the temperatures and also a bit about the light, I took away what I knew from the Seperate and applied that to the care of my Malayemys. These animals are called snail eaters, and if you look at their head, you can certainly imagine them crushing the shell of snails and other crustaceans. But in my care, they only get snails on occasion. Most of their diet is actually based on the reptile expert turtle pellets, which they have been feeding on greatly from the start, one of the many pros of having captive bred. And in addition to that, I also feed them with a lot of insects like Sophoba, dubias, crickets, mealworms. They will get mussel, shrimp, sometimes a piece of smelt and sometimes some worms. The Malayemys are kept separate, and I do that because it was advised by the breeder and also other keepers who have success with the species. So that does mean that I've never put them together and I cannot tell you what happens exactly. But the posts I have found is that they can actually be quite territorial, and I have to say that there are a lot of Sterlonian species that actually do better when kept separate. In most cases, when they are kept in groups, they are just simply not feeding the same or their fertility drops. But of course there are also cases where animals are very territorial and they will fight, and you will see stress of just one animal being always on the land or always the latest to feed. So that's the reason why I keep the Malayemys and also a lot of other species separate. What I like to note is that of course these animals in the temple ponds and also in the natural range can be found in higher densities. But we have to remind ourselves that they are found in very murky, dark waters and they are active on the bottom. So there's a lot of sediment and there's a lot of visual barriers. So the animals do not directly see each other all the time. And in our captive care, the water is often quite clear, and of course the amount of space they have is even smaller. So I do not think that in this case, looking at the way they are kept in temples or the way they are found in the wild is a great representation of how we should keep them in captive care. Side note, this is of course my own idea and not backed by science, but I do think it's a valid thing to take in account. The aquarium I currently keep my Malayemys in, and there's one per setup, is 80 centimeters long, 60 centimeters deep and 30 centimeters high. As you can see, there is a land area all the way the length of the aquarium, and the water is about 20 to 25 centimeters, especially for the males. This turtle species is not a great swimmer, something you will notice when they try to feed from the surface without having any structure to lean on. They seem a bit clumsy, and the species is mostly active on the bottom looking for crustaceans. I did find videos of these animals being collected or being set free in deeper water areas, and of course they are found in the Mekong Delta, but in these areas there are a lot of sloping banks, there are a lot of structures, a lot of vegetation, so a lot of options for them to climb to the surface and get some air. That is also the reason why in my aquariums there are a lot of structures, a lot of wood, and I also have a ramp that is easily accessible so the animals can easily get to the surface. On a small side note, Seperate crassicollis is also described to be a bad swimmer and mostly active on the bottom. But when I visited the lovely Prague Zoo collection, I actually saw a Seperate swimming in very strong current in a pond that was meters deep. And I have to say that the same goes for other chelonians being described as being bad swimmers, who I have seen managing in deeper water and actively swimming to the surface without any help from climbing material. The build and behavior of Malayemys certainly is different to Seperate, but I do think it is worth noting, and maybe keeping our animals in shallow, low flow water also makes them use less muscles, resulting in a more clumsy and less strong swimming animal. So for this reason I am gonna try to slowly raise the water levels and see how my Malayemys react to this, of course still making sure there's plenty of structure for them to reach the surface. That being said, these animals do spend most of their time active on the bottom foraging for food, so plenty of surface area to do so is way more important as having a deeper, higher aquarium. As you can see, the filtration is pretty simple, but I also rely heavily on water changes. I do about a 50 to 70% water change every 7 to 10 days, and when I do this I make sure that the temperature of the water I exchange is around the same temperature as the one in the aquarium, and during this time I also clean out the sponge filter that is driven by an air pump. These turtles are kept in my warm room, but still, just to be sure, there's a preset heater that is set at 25 degrees Celsius, and of course there's also a basking spot for them to bask, which they quite regularly do. And that's also why I added the UV. As you can see, the standard Arcadia 6% fluorescent tube is above the basking area and also a bit above the land area. Now if you decide to keep these species and you're not able to keep the temperature in the room as high as I have, or at least a little bit raised, then aqua terrarium is probably the choice for you, because in this setup it's enclosed, so all the heat you put in with your lights and with the heater in the water stays in much easier, and this way the difference between your water temperature and your air temperature is not as drastic, which is something that can impact the health of your turtle. So if you're keeping any tropical turtle in a relatively cool room or cooler space, or in your living room for instance, then an aqua terrarium that is closed, of course ventilated, but is closed, will definitely benefit you and make sure that you can keep the animals in the temperature ranges that you would like to. If we look at the female, you can see she's a whole lot bigger as the male. There is some sexual dimorphism with this species, so that can explain the size difference of my males, especially this one. This one is a bit more picky with feeding compared to the other two, but the male over here is a great feeder and he's still obviously smaller than the females. So I'm not sure how much of this size difference is due to my care, or how much of the size difference is actually the natural sexual dimorphism that you see with the species. Anyway, this female is a whole lot bigger, and I feel like this aquarium is too small for her. So she will get an upgrade, and she will, and eventually also the males if they get the same size. There she's coming, beautiful lady. She will move in one of these aquariums, aqua terrariums, and the reason is because this one is about twice the square surface as the other aquariums. So this is going to be the setup that she will move to in the near future. I'm really looking forward, not only to give her more space, but also because then I can add more fish, and that is something that I really enjoy about my Malayemys. I actually have a bunch of fish kept with them. Not only does keeping fish with your turtles look quite cool, what I also like is that my fish are actually a bit more fragile than my turtles. So if I make sure that the water quality and the temperature is correct for my fish, I'm certain that it also will be okay for my Malayemys. So not only does it look cool, but they are also for me a sort of canary in the mine. For this reason, of course, I do make sure that all the fish I keep with my snail eaters are found in the same region. So I have success with botias, Aplogyles, Siamese algae eaters and different species of loaches. And of course, it is always smart to quarantine your fish before you put them with your turtles. I am sure that in about a year, the info I would like to share, based on the experiences I have, will probably be a bit different. But this is the way I approach the care of my snail eaters at the moment, and for those interested, I hope you got something out of it. When it comes to my future with this species, of course I would like to give the animals more space most of all, and maybe in the future I can add the other species of Malayemys, the Macrocephala, but for now I am really happy how my Malayemys are doing, and I can't wait for them to get a bit older, and maybe hopefully one day I can try to get them to breed. That would be so cool.